How dare you waste the revolution? That's what I want to talk about today. An idea planted in the right spot is like a pair of glasses. It can totally change the way you look at stuff. And it might be far bigger than the idea seems at first. So what we're going to do for the first bit today is I want to take you on a tour of a different way of looking at how this world we live in is working. I want you to see the impact of the revolution. Chicago is the home of the skyscraper. This is where they invented it. If you saw skyscrapers going up 100 or so years ago, you could say, oh, that's interesting. People in the construction business really need to think about the implications of what it means to build a skyscraper. And if I had been around then, I would have said, there's something way bigger than that going on, because skyscrapers enable cities. If you don't have skyscrapers, you don't have a city, you have a favela, right? But once you have skyscrapers, you have cities. And once you have cities, you have all sorts of other sorts of transactions and social constructs and real estate values and political shifts. And you could take a look at what they invented here in Chicago, the skyscraper, and come to the conclusion that in a very short period of time afterwards, the whole world is going to change. But you have to be looking for that. I have a poignant reminder of what it means to be looking on my desk in my office in Hastings-on-Hudson. There's a green wicker box. And in that wicker box is a t-shirt, long sleeve, gray, my favorite kind. Cost me over $1 billion. Back in 1986, when I started being a book packager, everything I saw looked like an opportunity to write and sell a book. That's what I did for a living. I planned projects around books. 1990-something, I wrote a book called Email Addresses of the Rich and Famous, which I'm very embarrassed about. And Roger Ebert still won't speak to me over it because I put his email address in there. And then after that, I saw the internet thing really happening. I was asked to write a cover story for a magazine about what the World Wide Web was going to become. And looking at all that and seeing what was going on, I realized that what I should do is write the Smiley Dictionary, fun things to do with your keyboard, and I should write a book or package a book or create a book called Best of the Net, which would be 200 pages of the stuff you could get from Archie and Veronica and Use Groups and Usenet and all this other stuff. Well, we brought this book to the publisher. They printed 40,000 copies. To promote the book to the sales force, we printed up these T-shirts. And the T-shirt said Best of the Net in front, and that's where it's at in the back with a little @ sign. Well, I still have that T-shirt because while I was busy making a book called Best of the Net, two guys with exactly the same amount of resources that I had, with exactly the same foresight about the world, built a company called Yahoo. David and Jerry saw what I saw. I made a book that's out of print. They built a company that at one point was worth $80 billion. The moral of this story has nothing to do with technology. The moral of the story has to do with what are you going to do once you realize professional wrestling is fake? What are you going to do when you realize that the skyscraper exists? What are you going to do when you notice that the world is changing? So let me give you a couple examples. This is my special Midwest edition. Duncan Hines is one of my entrepreneurial heroes. Duncan Hines worked for the Wells Fargo Corporation. At one point, he was making a delivery. This is in the 1920s. He got lost in a blizzard in Colorado. He was isolated in a blizzard. He almost died. When he got back to civilization, he went into a restaurant. There were very, very, very few restaurants in those days, and ordered 8 ham and egg breakfasts and ate them all. Duncan liked to eat. After he left Wells Fargo, he got a job selling printing, commercial printing, as a traveling salesman. In those days, if you were a traveling salesman, what that meant was you went by train or maybe an old-fashioned car, city to city. If you were a traveling salesman, there was almost no place to sleep, and there was certainly almost no place to eat because people didn't go out to eat. If they did go out to eat, they either went to a place they could trust or a really fancy place which he couldn't afford. There was a legitimate danger of ptomaine poisoning every single day if you were a door-to-door salesman. So Dunkin' started keeping a list of safe places to eat. And one year for Christmas, he cheaped out, and he and his wife printed up his list and sent it to everyone as a Christmas present. So many people loved the list that they asked for it the next year. And year after year after year, Dunkin' created what now we think of as the Zagat's Restaurant Guide, except it was called Dunkin's Heinz Guide to Good Eating. And then Dunkin' started going to this new class of restaurant that he had been able to approve, and he would sell them or rent them a sign that they could put out in front of their restaurant, approved by Dunkin' Heinz. This cycle continued. Dunkin' invented the standards for restaurant purity and health. Dunkin' invented the idea that you could eat when you were on the road. And as the car came along, Dunkin' became quite profitable at what he was doing and stopped selling printing and started becoming a publisher. This grew until one day a guy named Park came to him and said, I'd like to put your name on a line of canned food so we can do the same thing for safety in the supermarket that you did in restaurants. And that shift, which it took Dunkin' a long time to get his arms around it, ended up creating a business that when Ray Park died in the 1970s was worth $500 million. All because Dunkin' Heinz saw that once you invent the car, you need restaurant guides. Once you invent the car, national brand of canned foods starts to make sense. The leap from car to cake mix is pretty extraordinary, but it doesn't require assets. It requires insight. About the same time that Dunkin' Heinz was doing this, his fictional counterpart, Betty Crocker, who's from Minnesota, Midwest edition, went on the radio. She was so popular that General Mills had to hire 200 women, they were all women, and teach them how to sign Betty Crocker's autograph. And letters would come in every single day, and Betty would write back by hand with recipes or ideas, etc. Radio became the foundation, the engine, to permit the Betty Crocker cake mix, Betty Crocker brand name, to be worth over $1 billion. So you go from radio, just like you went from the car, to cake mix. This has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with attention. It has everything to do with how we talk to people. So I was talking to a media company the other day, and I said, you know, let's go take a quick look at the hierarchy of how media companies made money. Because it touches technology, but it isn't technology. Spectrum was number one. You couldn't have the radio station that Betty Crocker paid money to if the FCC didn't give you a license, right? That license came from Herbert Hoover, who before he was the second worst president ever, was the head of the FCC, which had a different name at the time. And the FCC gave away spectrum that was priceless to a few radio stations. Those radio stations profited from it for 70 years, charging a tax if you wanted to reach people, because reaching people, spreading ideas is really valuable. Well, when we have cable, spectrum isn't as important as carriage. Ted Turner is a billionaire because Ted Turner realized that it's one thing to lay cable. It's another thing to get in early and own a channel. ESPN is worth billions of dollars because there is no competitor to ESPN, because once a cable network has picked you and given you that spot on the dial, all the other guys are boxed out. Anyone could have started MTV, but there's no room for the second MTV because the first one got so much carriage. It was carried to lots of places. So a media company in the second tier is all about, do you have a spot on the dial? But then the internet comes along, and the internet blows up the dial. Now anyone can have carriage. Anyone can have their own channel. So it's about brand. Does the brand of this media matter? Martha Stewart is a brand. Oprah is a brand. It doesn't matter where they are on the dial. People will seek them out. And so the media empire shifts again, and there's room for a lot more brands than there were for Spectrum or there were for carriage. And then it goes one step further, because if there's too many brands, now we care about permission. Because if no one wants to hear from you, they can't find you on the dial. But if you have the privilege, the ability to reach people who want to be reached, you have a new asset, which leads to the next one, which is this idea of having a tribe. Not only do I have permission to talk to people, the brand says, but I can get them to talk to each other. And all of a sudden, the ideas of Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines and what you can build on top of that becomes really interesting. It's not a technology discussion anymore. So a couple other companies to talk about. Threadless, Chicago company. Anyone here from Threadless? I don't know if they came. Threadless sells T-shirts. You know how many companies in the United States can make T-shirts? Like 1 billion. Making a T-shirt is really easy. So how does Threadless go from 1 million to 2 million to 5 million to 10 million to 20 million to $30 million in sales, high profit sales, real money being exchanged? Because they just print T-shirts. They don't even do it particularly better than anybody else. They just print T-shirts, and their T-shirts aren't cheaper than anyone else. They're more expensive than other people's T-shirts. Well, what Threadless did is they looked at all this technical stuff going on, and they said, what do people really want? Not what can technology do for them, but what do they want? Well, what they want is to be recognized. What they want is to be famous. What they want is to be part of something. What they want is to have something to talk about. So Threadless says to all of the people here, come up with a cool design for a T-shirt and upload it to our site. And we're going to have a vote every week. And if your T-shirt design gets voted, the most popular one, we'll send you $1,000. Oh, and by the way, if you want to tell your friends to vote for you, that's okay. It's allowed. Oh, and by the way, if while you're voting you see a T-shirt you like, even if it doesn't win, we'll make it for you for 20 bucks. That's the entire business model. That's the whole thing. Just down the street, another little company, 37 Signals, gets started. And 37 Signals says, well, we understand that Microsoft is a big and scary and sometimes arrogant company. But we want to make a piece of software right under their nose that will make money on the first day. So the guys at 37 Signals say, the first thing we're going to need to do is to earn the attention and trust of computer geeks, because computer geeks are trusted within their organizations. People talk to them about what to do next. And if they love us the way they love Google, we'll spread. So they had this audacious plan that the best way to get their attention was to write a computer language and give it away for free. So before they actually made the thing they needed to make, first they made the software they could use to make the thing they were going to make, and they were going to tell everyone how they did it and give it to them. And so Rails came out and is a piece of software that many of you have used or know people who have used. And that gave the guys who wrote Rails a little bit of cred. Then they used Rails to help them accelerate the creation of Basecamp and Campfire and all the other products that 37 Signals makes. And then 37 Signals said, you know, we get this idea of free. We haven't met Chris Anderson, but he may have a point. But free isn't everything. This is software worth paying for. Of course, you're not paying for the software. You're paying for the results. You're going to be using it. While you're using it, you're going to pay because it's worth it. You're managing a $100,000 project. You're not willing to pay 29 bucks a month. What's wrong with you? And so they built a company that couldn't have existed 20 years ago. And in fact, if you're over 30 years old, I want you to think back 20 years. 20 years is exactly one generation. One generation ago, you might have just gotten a cell phone. You almost certainly worked in the same building as your boss. You knew the people you knew, and you didn't know anyone but the people you knew. There was no class of people of friendlies, right? Friends of friends were basically invisible. You got 2 or 3 or 4 emails a day if you had email. You booked airplane flights by calling up a stranger and trusting her, it was usually a her, to figure out where you should go, and you would pay a fortune if necessary. Hotels? Well, you had to go to a famous chain hotel because you didn't know the other ones. Well, how could you? You were going someplace you'd never been before. You needed to look for a job or, God forbid, a date. Well, the method for that was really alien to what we think of now as normal. You want to find out about a political candidate? Think hard about this. 20 years ago, you want to find out about who you should trust with billions of dollars and nuclear weapons. What do you do? Who do you ask? Where do you look? I can't even remember. I have no recollection of how we figured out what was going on about that kind of stuff. News, well, you had to wait till tomorrow to see what happened today. And you had to go somewhere and pay a quarter for it, or commit to having someone chop down the trees, print the stuff, put them in a truck, drive them to your house, and bring it to you at 5 a.m., even if you didn't want to read the news that day. And you wanted to grow your business. Well, most people had never heard of your business. So that meant you had to pay the newspaper, the one that was chopping down the trees and bringing it to people's houses, to put an ad in that they might or might not look at so that they would think to. And you wanted to sell to another business. Well, that meant you had to hire a sales force. That sales force didn't know who to call because there wasn't an easy way to look up who to call. I still remember calling the receptionist at Microsoft in 1991 and saying, can you tell me who's in charge of marketing? I don't remember what the product was, Word. No, I'm sorry, we don't reveal that information. What am I going to do here? I'm going to find out that person's name, then call them up and steal them away by offering them a better job? And you think that not telling me their name is going to keep me from doing that? Why are you doing this? Isn't the person in charge of marketing this product in charge of figuring out how to market the product? And wouldn't they at least want to know that there's something here that could help them do that? No, we don't want to hear from you. Okay, I get it. It's impossible to imagine any of these things today. And yet, when people talk about the internet, they think it has something to do with Twitter. It has nothing to do with Twitter. That this revolution, the revolution of our lifetime, the biggest revolution since Henry Ford, Midwestern edition, is bigger than anything we've lived through. And yet we persist on asking the following question. How can that innovation help me do that thing I've always been doing better? Right? How can that innovation help my hospital crib factory sell more hospital cribs? How can that innovation help me interrupt more people and tell them about my yogurt stand? How can that innovation help me get a record deal with a record label so that I can then, chop down some vinyl trees or some CD bushes and print up these things and get people to go to Tower Records? Oh, I'm sorry, there isn't a Tower Records. Get people to go somewhere and pay money to buy it. It's exactly the wrong question. It's like asking, after you heard that professional wrestling is fake, it's like asking, okay, how do I get in better shape so I can defeat the other person in the professional wrestling match? No, it's how do I get Vince McMahon to like me enough that I get to defeat the other guy? Not how do I lift more weights? But we're busy lifting weights instead of realizing that there's this completely other game being played.